He is the ultimate symbol of the classic American frontier. The quiet, stoic protector who danced with wolves, guarded pop stars, and reigned over the biggest ranch in Montana. On screen, he is the untouchable patriarch, a man who controls the land, commands absolute loyalty, and destroys anyone who dares to threaten his family's legacy. But behind the billion-dollar box office and a rugged, unyielding stare lies a reality that is deeply, profoundly heartbreaking. At 71 years old, Kevin Costner is a man standing in the wreckage of his own empire. Behind the Hollywood mythology is a man who was forced into a bitter, humiliating public divorce, temporarily locked out of his own home by the woman he loved. A legendary actor who walked away from the most successful television show on earth, alienating his fan base, just to risk his entire personal fortune on one final, impossible dream. Kevin Costner's life is a story of magnificent gambles and devastating losses. How does the ultimate American patriarch survive when his real-life family shatters under the weight of his ambition? What drives a multimillionaire in his 70s to mortgage his own properties, risking complete financial ruin instead of enjoying a peaceful retirement? And what is the profound, lonely cost of being the last true cowboy in a Hollywood that has long forgotten how to ride? Before we answer these questions, we must go back to the beginning. To understand a gambler, you must first know the boy who was cut from the film. The late bloomer and the faceless corpse. Hollywood has always been an industry intoxicated by the explosive magic of youth. It is a machine designed to discover 20-year-old prodigies, crown them with overnight stardom, and watch them burn brightly across the sky. But the true, enduring legends of the American screen, the men who carried profound, heavy gravity of the earth in their bones, are rarely overnight sensations. They are the late bloomers. They are the men who must first be broken by the world before they are allowed to conquer it. To understand Kevin Costner, the man who would one day become the undisputed patriarch of the American frontier, the Academy Award-winning director, and the stoic heart of Yellowstone, you cannot start with $1 billion box office triumphs. You must start in the sawdust. You must start with the humiliating, invisible labor of a man who was repeatedly told to wait his turn. Born on January 18, 1955, in Linwood, California, Kevin grew up in a grounded, working-class household. His father, William, was a ditch digger who eventually worked his way up to become an electrician and a utility executive. From his father, Kevin absorbed a very specific, quiet brand of mid-century American masculinity. You do not complain, you work with your hands, and you earn your keep. When Kevin graduated from California State Fullerton in 1978 with a degree in business, he was standing at the threshold of a safe, predictable corporate life. But during a fateful flight back from Mexico, a chance encounter with the legendary actor Richard Burton planted a seed of impossible ambition in his mind. Burton told the young man that if he wanted to be an actor, he had to give it everything. He had to jump into the fire. Kevin walked away from his business career, moved to Los Angeles with his college sweetheart and new wife, Cindy, and stepped into the absolute, unforgiving meat grinder of the entertainment industry. The late 1970s and early 1980s were not glamorous for Kevin Costner. He did not possess the exotic, theatrical intensity of Al Pacino or the polished, boyish perfection of Tom Cruise. He was tall, quiet, and possessed a slow, deliberate cadence that casting directors simply did not know how to categorize. To support his family and pay for his acting classes, Kevin relied on the blue-collar work ethic of his father. He worked as a tour guide, driving tourists past the magnificent, gated mansions of the very stars he was desperately trying to become. He worked on freezing fishing boats. But mostly he worked as a carpenter. Imagine the profound, poetic irony of his existence during those years. He was a man burning with the desire to act, spending his days covered in sawdust, hammering nails, and physically building the sound stages and movie sets where other, more fortunate men would stand and deliver their lines. He was constructing the very platforms he was not allowed to step onto. But Kevin possessed a relentless, quiet stubbornness. He kept auditioning. And finally, in 1983, At the age of 28, the universe seemed to offer him the ultimate life-changing miracle. Lawrence Kasdan, one of the hottest writers and directors in Hollywood, was casting an ensemble drama called The Big Chill. The film was a poignant, generational masterpiece about a group of former college friends who reunite for a weekend after the tragic, sudden passing of their friend, Alex Marshall. Kevin Costner was cast as Alex. Even though the character had passed away before the movie began, Kasdan had written an intricate, emotional flashback scene intended for the very end of the film. It was a beautiful sequence depicting a Thanksgiving dinner from their college days, where Kevin's character, Alex, was a vibrant, smiling center of the group, supposed to carve the turkey. Kevin poured his absolute soul into the role. He filmed the scenes alongside a cast of future heavyweights, Glenn Close, William Hurt, Kevin Kline, and Jeff Goldblum. For the struggling carpenter from Linwood, this was it. This was the breakthrough. He called his family. He told them the years of struggle were finally over. He was going to be in a major Hollywood motion picture. And then, the ultimate cruelty of the cinematic machine intervened. During the editing process, Lawrence Kasdan realized a difficult narrative truth. Showing Alex in a flashback at the end of the movie ruined the lingering mystery and the emotional pacing of the story. For the film to work, Alex had to remain a ghost. He had to be an unseen presence, an idea rather than a face. Kasdan made the agonizing decision to cut the Thanksgiving flashback entirely. He left Kevin Costner on the cutting room floor. When The Big Chill premiered in the autumn of 1983, it became a massive critical and commercial phenomenon. But for Kevin Costner, sitting in the dark theater, the experience was a profound, deeply public humiliation. He was technically in the movie, but only for a few fleeting seconds during the opening credits. The camera pans over a mortician dressing a corpse for a funeral. The audience sees a tailored suit being pulled over a lifeless body. They see the scarred wrists of a fallen friend. But the camera never pans up. They never show his face. The man who had spent years building stages for other actors had finally been invited into the masterpiece, only to be reduced to a faceless, silent prop. It is difficult to overstate the psychological devastation of that moment. For a struggling actor, having your entire performance completely erased from a hit movie is the kind of crushing defeat that usually breaks a man's spirit. It is the moment most people quit, pack their bags, and go back to a safe corporate job. But Kevin Costner is not most men. When Kasdan called him to break the devastating news, Kevin did not scream. He did not throw a tantrum or complain to the press. He swallowed his immense disappointment, absorbed the agonizing blow to his ego, and accepted the director's artistic decision with absolute, unwavering class. Reflecting on those brutal early years and the whispering doubts of the industry, Costner later laid bare the unbreakable armor of his self-belief. I didn't care about the whisperers. It didn't bother me. I had my own idea about what I was doing. I'm a part of something, but I'm not the story. I'm a part of it, and so I'm comfortable with my part in it. That quiet, old-school stoicism deeply moved Lawrence Kasdan. The director felt a profound sense of guilt for erasing the young actor. Kasdan publicly admitted, "It didn't work, and I felt so bad about it." To make amends, Kasdan promised Kevin that he would write a part specifically for him in his next movie. That promise was not an empty Hollywood pleasantry. 2 years later, in 1985, Kasdan cast Kevin Costner as the reckless, dual-pistol-wielding cowboy Jake in the acclaimed Western Silverado. The faceless corpse had suddenly exploded onto the screen with a blinding, undeniable charisma. The world finally saw his face. They saw the rugged jawline, the mischievous smile, and the effortless, magnetic grace of a man who was born to ride a horse on camera. Silverado launched Kevin Costner into the stratosphere, transforming him from an invisible carpenter into one of the most bankable leading men of his generation. But the brutal, invisible trauma of The Big Chill left a permanent, invisible scar on his psyche. Sitting in that editing room, watching his face be entirely deleted from a masterpiece, Kevin learned the most important, dangerous lesson of his entire career. He realized that an actor is completely powerless. An actor is merely raw material, clay waiting to be molded by a director in a dark room. He realized that if you do not own the camera, and if you do not control the editing bay, you do not control your own destiny. That searing humiliation planted the seed of a magnificent, reckless gambler. It forged a man who would eventually refuse to place his fate in the hands of studio executives ever again. The quiet carpenter was about to transform into a visionary director, and as the 1980s drew to a close, he was preparing to push all of his chips into the center of the table, risking his entire fortune on a sprawling, 3-hour Western epic that the entire town of Hollywood was eagerly waiting to see fail. The Golden Boy and the Impossible Gamble. There is a brief, incredibly intoxicating window in the life of a Hollywood leading man when the universe simply aligns. It is a moment when every script you touch turns to gold, every risk pays off, and the public falls so deeply in love with your face that you can do absolutely no wrong. For Kevin Costner, that golden window opened wide in the late 1980s. Following the breakout success of Silverado, he embarked on a relentless, staggering streak of critical and commercial triumphs. In 1987, he embodied the incorruptible, steel-jawed Elliot-ness in The Untouchables, standing toe-to-toe with giants like Sean Connery and Robert De Niro. The very same year, he delivered a masterclass in tension in the political thriller No Way Out. Then came the baseball films, Bull Durham in 1988, and the deeply nostalgic, culturally immortal Field of Dreams in 1989. When he stood in the middle of that magical Iowa cornfield and heard the whispered voice say, "If you build it, he will come," he was not just speaking to the fictional ghosts of baseball players. He was speaking directly to the soul of the American public. In an era dominated by the loud, oil, machine gun-toting action heroes of the 1980s, Kevin Costner brought something entirely different to the screen. He brought back the quiet, stoic dignity of Gary Cooper and James Stewart. He represented a grounded, classic American sincerity. By 1989, he was the absolute golden boy of Hollywood. The studios were practically begging him to take the easiest, most lucrative path available. They wanted to hand him multi-million-dollar checks to star in safe, predictable sequels and standard romantic comedies. All he had to do was smile, read the lines, and collect the money. But remember the psychological scar left by the Big Chill. Remember the starving carpenter who had been completely erased from the editing room floor. Kevin Costner had learned that being an actor in someone else's movie was merely being a passenger on someone else's ship. He did not want to be a passenger anymore. He wanted to be the captain. In 1989, Kevin decided to make his directorial debut, and he chose to do it by making the most commercially terrifying, fundamentally ill-advised gamble in the modern history of the film industry. He decided to direct, produce, and star in a sprawling, melancholic Western epic called Dances with Wolves. To understand the sheer, breathtaking audacity of this decision, you must understand the cinematic climate of 1989. The Western genre was considered completely, irreparably dead. Studio executives viewed Westerns as box office poison, a dusty relic of a bygone era that modern audiences had zero interest in watching. Furthermore, Kevin's vision for the film defied every single rule of commercial filmmaking. The script, written by his friend Michael Blake, called for a runtime of 3 hours. Even more shocking to the Hollywood establishment, Kevin insisted that over 25% of the dialogue be spoken entirely in the authentic Lakota language, requiring English subtitles. The studio executives in their air-conditioned, glass-walled offices in Los Angeles looked at the proposal and thought he had lost his mind. Who was going to sit in a theater for 3 hours to read subtitles in a dead genre directed by a first-time filmmaker? The industry did not just doubt him, they actively, viciously mocked him. As production began and word of the film's massive scale leaked out, the Hollywood press began referring to the project as Kevin's Gate, a cruel reference to Heaven's Gate, the notorious 1980 Western flop that bankrupted an entire movie studio. They were eagerly sharpening their knives, waiting for the golden boy to fall off his pedestal. When filming commenced in the remote, rugged plains of South Dakota, the production quickly spiraled into a logistical nightmare. Directing a film is difficult enough. Directing a historical epic while simultaneously starring in every major scene is Herculean. But adding unpredictable weather, wild wolves, and attempting to coordinate a stampede of 3,000 live, untamed buffalo across the open prairie was an exercise in absolute madness. The schedule dragged on. The budget, initially set at $15 million, quickly ballooned to $22 million. The studio, terrified of the escalating costs, threatened to pull the plug and shut the entire production down. It is in these desperate, freezing, make-or-break moments that you discover what a man is truly made of. Faced with the collapse of his impossible dream, Kevin Costner did not compromise. He did not agree to cut the movie down to 2 hours. He did not agree to scrap the subtitles. Instead, the man who had once worked as a carpenter to afford acting classes took out his own checkbook. He personally injected $3 million of his own money into production to cover the budget overruns and keep the cameras rolling. He pushed his entire fortune into the center of the poker table. If the movie failed, he would not just be a laughingstock, he would be financially devastated. Reflecting on that terrifying financial and artistic leap of faith, Kevin later perfectly articulated the uncompromising code of the true artist. I thought, well, I've got this money, and if I lose it, I lose it. But I'm not going to let them change this movie. I didn't care about the trends. I cared about the story. You have to be willing to bet on yourself when nobody else will. I would rather fail on my own terms and succeed by compromising my soul. He endured the freezing cold, the exhaustion, and immense psychological pressure of carrying the entire production on his shoulders. He fought for every single frame of that film, driven by a profound, almost spiritual respect for the Native American culture he was portraying and a deep reverence for the vanishing beauty of the American frontier. In November of 1990, Dances with Wolves was finally released to the public. The Hollywood executives and the cynical critics sat in the darkened theaters, ready to write the obituaries of Kevin Costner's career. But as a magnificent, sweeping score by John Barry filled the auditorium and the breathtaking, widescreen vistas of the untouched American prairie washed over the audience, the mockery completely evaporated. It was replaced by a stunned, overwhelming silence. The film was not a vanity project. It was an absolute, undisputed masterpiece. Audiences were deeply moved by the tragic, respectful, and profoundly human portrayal of the Lakota Sioux tribe. They wept for the loss of the frontier. The film tapped into a deep, universal longing for a simpler, more honorable connection to the earth. The financial and critical vindication was earth-shattering. The movie that everyone predicted would bankrupt him went on to gross an astonishing $424 million worldwide. It became the highest-grossing Western in the history of cinema. But the ultimate revenge against the executives who had mocked him arrived on the evening of March 25, 1991, at the Academy Awards. Dances with Wolves was nominated for 12 Oscars. It won 7. When Kevin Costner's name was called for Best Director, beating out cinematic titans like Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola, and when the film was crowned Best Picture, the victory was absolute. He walked up to the podium, holding the golden statues, having completely humiliated the cynics. The man who had once been cut out of The Big Chill, the actor whose face was left on the editing room floor, was now the undisputed king of Hollywood. He owned the camera. He owned the edit. He had bet his entire fortune, his reputation, and his sanity on a 3-hour, subtitled Western, and he had won the biggest pot in the history of the industry. He was 36 years old. He had achieved a level of power, wealth, and creative autonomy that very few human beings ever experience. He had proven that sheer, uncompromising willpower could bend the universe to his exact specifications. But this is the fundamental, tragic danger of pulling off an impossible miracle. When a gambler bets his life savings on a single hand of poker and wins, he rarely takes his chips and walks away from the table. He begins to believe that he cannot lose. He begins to believe that the rules of gravity, mathematics, and human limitations simply no longer apply to him. Kevin Costner had successfully conquered the dust, the wolves, and the infinite plains of the American West. But as the 1990s progressed, his monumental ambition was about to steer him away from the safety of the dry land and directly into the turbulent, uncontrollable depths of the ocean. He was about to embark on an aquatic production that would become the most expensive, disastrous nightmare in Hollywood history. And amidst the crashing waves of his own hubris, the quiet, safe harbor of a 16-year marriage was about to be completely, devastatingly ripped apart. The ocean of hubris and the sinking of the sanctuary. There's profound, almost mythological danger in achieving exactly what you set out to do. When a man bets his entire existence against impossible odds and actually wins, the victory can subtly, dangerously alter his perception of reality. He stops believing in luck. He stops believing in the natural limits of human capability. He looks at the Academy Awards on his mantle. He looks at the hundreds of millions of dollars in his bank account, and he begins to believe that he can control the weather. Having conquered the endless, dusty plains of the American West and dances with wolves, Kevin Costner's ambition swelled to a titanic, unprecedented scale. He no longer wanted to master the land. He wanted to conquer the ocean. In 1994, Kevin embarked on a project that would become the most notorious, highly publicized, and chaotic production in modern Hollywood history, the post-apocalyptic sci-fi epic Waterworld. The premise of the film was incredibly ambitious, a future where the polar ice caps had melted, submerging the entire Earth underwater. To bring this vision to life, Kevin and his director, his old friend Kevin Reynolds, refused to shoot in a safe, controlled studio tank. Driven by a relentless demand for absolute authenticity, they moved the massive production to the open, unpredictable waters of the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Hawaii. It was a decision born of absolute hubris, and the ocean immediately, violently punished them for it. Shooting a film on open water is a logistical nightmare that defies comprehension. A staggering 1,000-ton steel atoll, a quarter-mile in circumference, was constructed in the ocean. There were no bathrooms on the set. Every single time a boat sailed into background as shot, the entire massive structure had to be painfully rotated. And then the wrath of nature descended. Hurricane warnings forced the crew to evacuate. Violent, unpredictable squalls battered the actors. At one point, Kevin Costner himself was tied to the mast of his trimaran 40 feet in the air when a sudden storm kicked up, bashing him mercilessly with seawater for 30 terrifying minutes before the crew could safely bring him down. Then, the ultimate catastrophe occurred. One of their multi-million-dollar floating sets literally sank into the depths of the Pacific. The budget, originally approved for a daunting $100 million, exploded completely out of control, eventually ballooning to a record-shattering $175 million. It was, at the time, the most expensive movie ever made in the history of human civilization. As the production dragged on for an exhausting 157 days, the Hollywood media, who had bowed to him just 4 years earlier, smelled blood in the water. The press viciously turned on their golden boy. Before the film was even finished, they gleefully dubbed it Fish Star and Kevin's Gate, cruel references to historical box office bombs. The stress on the set was apocalyptic. Friendships were shattered. Kevin clashed bitterly with his director, Kevin Reynolds, eventually taking over the editing of the film himself. The man who had charmed the world was now carrying the agonizing weight of a sinking $175 million Titan entirely on his own shoulders. But the brutal, crushing reality of Waterworld was not merely financial or professional. The true tragedy was occurring completely out of the frame, thousands of miles away from the Hawaiian coast. While Kevin was frantically fighting to keep his cinematic empire afloat in the Pacific, his real-life sanctuary was drowning. In October of 1994, right in the middle of the absolute chaos of the Waterworld production, a press release sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry. Kevin Costner and his wife, Cindy Silva, announced that they were ending their marriage. To understand the profound, devastating weight of this divorce, you must understand who Cindy was. She was not a Hollywood starlet he had met on a red carpet. She was a woman who had met him at California State Fullerton when they were both just college kids. She was a woman who married the broke, struggling carpenter. She was the one who held his hand when he came home completely shattered after his face was cut out of the Big Chill. She had given him 3 beautiful children, Annie, Lily, and Joe. Cindy was the absolute anchor of his existence. She was the only person on earth who knew the man before mythology. But a 16-year marriage is a delicate vessel, and it simply cannot survive the relentless, battering hurricane of global superstardom. The agonizing months Kevin spent away on remote movie sets, the relentless, suffocating intrusion of the paparazzi, and the quiet, insidious rumors that follow every major leading man eventually eroded the foundation of their relationship. When a man focuses all of his energy on directing the entire world, he inevitably loses the ability to direct the intimacy of his own living room. The divorce was finalized and the financial settlement was staggering, reported at $80 million, making it one of the most expensive divorces in Hollywood history at the time. But the money was entirely irrelevant. The true cost was a profound, echoing emptiness of losing the only woman who had loved him when he was nobody. Years later, stepping out from behind the stoic, protective mask of the Hollywood leading man, Kevin spoke about the devastating collapse of his marriage with a rare, bleeding vulnerability. My faith was shaken. No one wants their marriage to end, and it did. You're going to see the people you love most, your children, only half as much. That's a huge loss. You are going to see the children you love only half as much. For the older audiences watching this, for the men and women who have spent decades building a family, only to watch it fracture and dissolve, that sentence is an absolute, staggering emotional gut punch. It strips away the illusion of fame and reduces a multimillionaire superstar to a profoundly sad, lonely father, sitting in a massive, empty house, staring at photographs of a life he can never get back. When Waterworld finally premiered in July of 1995, it was not the financial ruin the media had gleefully predicted. It grossed a respectable $264 million worldwide and eventually turned a profit. But the damage to Kevin Costner's soul had already been done. The Golden Boy era was officially, permanently over. He had survived the ocean, but the storm had stripped him of his armor, his creative invincibility, and most tragically, his family. As he approached his 40s, the ultimate patriarch of American cinema found himself entirely unmoored, drifting into a long, quiet, and deeply uncertain wilderness. He was a man who possessed the wealth of the king, but he was about to discover that when the camera stopped rolling and the crowds go home, a king without a queen is just a man sitting alone in the dark. The wilderness years and the second anchor. There is a specific, echoing kind of silence that settles into a massive house when a marriage ends. It is not a peaceful silence. It is a heavy, suffocating quiet that constantly reminds you of everything you have lost. For Kevin Costner, the late 1990s and the early 2000s were defined by this profound, unyielding silence. Following the grueling, spectacularly public ordeal of Waterworld and the devastating collapse of his 16-year marriage to Cindy, the golden boy of Hollywood found himself entirely unmoored. As he crossed the threshold of his late 40s and entered his 50s, the cinematic landscape had fundamentally shifted. The industry that had once begged for his stoic, classic American presence was now pivoting toward frantic, computer-generated superheroes. His subsequent films, like The Postman and For Love of the Game, carried flashes of his undeniable old-school brilliance, but they failed to capture the billion-dollar magic of his youth. The era of Kevin Costner holding the entire world in the palm of his hand had quietly slipped away. In the ruthless mathematics of Hollywood, this period is often referred to as the wilderness years. It is an era where aging leading men must figure out how to transition from global phenomenons into working actors. But for Kevin, the professional wilderness was far less terrifying than the personal one. He was a man who deeply, fundamentally valued the concept of family. The American patriarch is not meant to walk alone. Yet, there he was, a multimillionaire, living in sprawling, breathtaking estates in California and Colorado, waking up alone. He engaged in a few brief, high-profile romances, and even fathered a son, Liam, during a brief relationship in 1996. But these fleeting connections did not provide a sanctuary. They only magnified the deep, aching void in his chest. He had survived the collapse of his first marriage, but the trauma of that separation, of having his family fractured, of seeing his children only half the time, and the grueling $80 million financial extraction, left a permanent, protective scar over his heart. He became incredibly guarded. He developed a deep, paralyzing fear of commitment, convinced that if he tried to build another permanent home, the universe would simply tear it down again. Once bitten, twice shy, as the old proverb goes. Kevin Costner was a man who had been bitten by the very jaws of fate, and he was absolutely terrified of bleeding again. But the universe, in its infinite and often beautifully stubborn wisdom, was not willing to let the cowboy ride off into the sunset completely alone. In the late 1990s, Kevin reconnected with a woman named Christine Baumgartner. They had briefly crossed paths years earlier on a golf course, but the timing had been wrong. Now, a model and handbag designer, Christine was nearly 20 years younger than Kevin. In the cynical world of tabloid journalism, a 20-year age gap is immediately reduced to a superficial cliché. But Christine was not a cliché. She was incredibly grounded, fiercely intelligent, and entirely unimpressed by the Hollywood mythology that surrounded him. She did not look at him and see the Academy Award-winning director of Dances with Wolves. She saw a tired, deeply guarded, but fundamentally decent man who needed someone to remind him how to live. She brought an immense, radiant light into the dark, echoing halls of his life. They dated for several years, building a quiet, deeply loving partnership away from the glaring lenses of the paparazzi. For a while, it seemed that Kevin had finally found the perfect, low-stakes companionship his bruised heart required. But Christine was a young woman with a clear, uncompromising vision for her own future. She loved Kevin deeply, but she wanted to be a mother. She wanted children. For Kevin, who was now in his late 40s, the very idea of starting a brand new family triggered an absolute, paralyzing panic. He already had 4 children. He had already failed at one marriage. He was terrified of being an older father, and he was even more terrified that he would fail again, putting another set of children to the agony of a broken home. His fear was so profound and so immovable that in 2002, he made the agonizing decision to end the relationship. He let the woman he loved walk away, simply because he was too afraid to give her the family she desired. For months, he lived in the crushing, self-imposed exile of that decision. The silence in his house returned, but this time, it was infinitely heavier, because he knew he was the one who had locked the door. But it is exactly in these moments of agonizing self-reflection that a man's true character is forged. A lesser man would have allowed his pride and his fear to dictate the rest of his life. A lesser man would have accepted the loneliness as a necessary consequence of his past failures. Kevin Costner, however, possessed the ultimate courage required of a true patriarch. The courage to admit he was completely wrong. He realized that letting his past trauma dictate his future was the ultimate act of cowardice. Reflecting on that terrifying, life-altering epiphany, Kevin later delivered a quote of such profound, unvarnished honesty that it completely strips away the armor of the Hollywood tough guy. Fear kept me from marrying her. She wanted a child, but I was afraid I couldn't be an effective father. I woke up and thought, am I going to lose a beautiful woman who is willing to be with me to my very last breath because I am afraid to say yes to a child? That's all it took. Sometimes you learn the thing you're most afraid will save your life. Sometimes you learn the thing you're most afraid will save your life. For the audiences watching at home, especially those who have stood at the crossroads of middle age, staring down the terrifying prospect of starting over, of risking a broken heart one more time, Those words carry the weight of absolute gospel. It is a stunning admission that true strength is not about avoiding the fire. It is about willingly stepping back into the flames for the sake of love. Kevin went back to Christine. He surrendered his ego. He conquered his fear. He promised her the future she deserved. On September 25th, 2004, in a scene straight out of a classic American fairy tale, Kevin and Christine were married. The wedding took place on a spectacular, sprawling 165-acre Dunbar Ranch in Aspen, Colorado. Kevin arrived at the ceremony in a horse-drawn carriage. He was 49 years old, standing under the massive, endless Colorado sky, exchanging vows with the woman who had pulled him out of the wilderness. In the years that followed, the man who had been terrified of having more children of his entire life. Together, he and Christine welcomed 3 beautiful children: Caden in 2007, Hayes in 2009, and Grace in 2010. The echoing silence of his massive estates was finally replaced by the chaotic, beautiful, life-affirming sound of children laughing, running, and growing. As he navigated through his 50s and into his early 60s, Kevin Costner was a man who had seemingly outsmarted the Hollywood curse. He had successfully transitioned into a respected elder statesman of cinema. He had repaired his soul. He had built a massive, beautiful blended family, and had secured a second anchor that felt completely, immovably permanent. He had learned how to be a patriarch in real life. But Hollywood, the great unforgiving machine, was not entirely finished with him. As the late 2010s approached, a script was making its way to his desk. It was a television series about a modern-day Montana rancher who would do absolutely anything to protect his land and his family. The role was John Dutton in a show called Yellowstone. It was the role he was born to play. It would catapult him back to the absolute summit of global fame. But what Kevin Costner could not possibly have known as he signed the contract and stepped back into the blinding spotlight was that the role of a lifetime was about to demand a devastating sacrifice. He had built his perfect, permanent sanctuary, but the monumental ambition that still burned quietly inside his cowboy soul was about to ignite a fire that would eventually burn his sanctuary entirely to the ground. The Patriarch of Yellowstone and the tragic irony. F. Scott Fitzgerald famously wrote that there are no second acts in American lives. For the vast majority of Hollywood stars, this cruel observation is absolutely true. Once a leading man ages out his golden years, once a hairline recedes and the blockbuster scripts stop arriving, the industry usually politely escorts him toward the exit. He is relegated to playing supporting roles, grandfathers, or fading softly into the comfortable obscurity of retirement. But Kevin Costner has never possessed the genetic makeup required for a quiet retirement. As he navigated through his early 60s, living a seemingly peaceful life with his wife Christine and their 3 young children, a profound cultural shift was occurring in the entertainment industry. The era of the 2-hour movie was slowly being eclipsed by the sprawling, deeply immersive narrative format of prestige television. In 2018, a brilliant, uncompromising writer and director named Taylor Sheridan approached Kevin with a script that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of his twilight years. It was a neo-Western drama series called Yellowstone. The role Sheridan offered him was John Dutton, the fierce, unyielding patriarch of the largest contiguous cattle ranch in the United States. John Dutton was a man out of time. He was an aging cowboy surrounded by land developers, politicians, and billionaires who wanted to strip his family's legacy away from him. Dutton was willing to lie, bleed, and destroy anyone who dared to threaten the land his ancestors had settled. It was a character built from the very same bedrock as Kevin Costner's soul. At 63 years old, Kevin accepted the role. When he put on the Stetson hat, zipped up the heavy canvas jacket, and stared out across the majestic, freezing valleys of Montana, he did not just act the part, he inhabited it. With his gravelly, measured voice and eyes that carried the heavy, unspoken weight of man trying to hold back the tide of modern civilization, he delivered a performance of terrifying, magnetic authority. When Yellowstone premiered, the Hollywood elite initially ignored it. But the American heartland, the millions of people living between the coasts who deeply value tradition, family legacy, and the unapologetic toughness of the Old West, embraced the show in absolute religious fervor. Yellowstone did not just become a hit. It became a cultural monument. It shattered television ratings, becoming the most watched show on cable network television. Kevin Costner was reportedly earning over $1 million per episode. In 2023, he won the Golden Globe for Best Actor in a Television Drama. Against all historical odds, in his mid-60s, Kevin Costner had engineered one of the greatest, most spectacular resurrections in the history of the industry. He was once again the absolute king of the American frontier. But behind the staggering television ratings and the awards, a dark, incredibly painful irony was slowly taking root. In literature, irony is defined as an outcome that is strikingly opposite to what is expected. In the life of Kevin Costner, the irony of Yellowstone was so profound, so devastatingly poetic, that it feels as though it was written by a cruel novelist. Every week, millions of viewers tune in to watch Kevin play a patriarch whose entire personal philosophy was rooted in the absolute preservation of his family. John Dutton frequently delivered haunting monologues about sacrifice, stating that every brutal thing he did, every drop of blood he spilled, was solely to protect the future of his children and the sanctity of his home. But what the audience sitting comfortably on their couches did not see was the agonizing, real-life cost required to create that fiction. To play the ultimate family man in Montana, Kevin Costner had to physically abandon his actual family in California. Shooting a television series of Yellowstone's massive, cinematic scale is a grueling, all-consuming endeavor. It required Kevin to spend months upon months isolated in the freezing, remote mountains of Montana and Utah. He was working exhausting 14-hour days, riding horses in bitter conditions, completely absorbed by the immense physical and emotional demands of production. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in their spectacular, sun-drenched estate in Santa Barbara, his wife Christine was raising their 3 young children largely on her own. This is a hidden, agonizing tax of massive success. When a man pours the absolute best parts of his soul, his energy, and his emotional depth into a fictional character, he returns to his real life completely hollowed out. The vibrant, present husband and father that Christine had married in 2004 was slowly being replaced by an exhausted, distracted titan who was fundamentally married to his work. The exact same ambition that had torn apart his first marriage to Cindy during the Waterworld era was quietly, aggressively creeping back into his blood. But the situation was about to become infinitely more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. Because Kevin Costner is not a man who is satisfied with simply being a highly paid employee. Just as he felt trapped on the set of The Big Chill, he began to feel creatively confined within the borders of a television show that he did not write and did not direct. He was making Taylor Sheridan's vision a reality, but the old, dormant gambler inside of him was beginning to wake up. He had a dream. It was a massive, sprawling, multi-part cinematic epic about the settlement of the American West. He had been holding on to the idea for over 30 years. It was called Horizon, an American Saga. As he approached his late 60s, an overwhelming, desperate sense of mortality began to grip him. He realized that the clock was ticking. He knew that if he did not make his magnum opus now, he would take the dream with him to the grave. He wanted to direct again. He wanted to own the camera again. He approached the studios to fund Horizon, but the executives gave him the exact same cynical, mocking response they had given him in 1989 for Dances with Wolves. They told him a 4-part Western epic was financial suicide. They refused to give him the money. Most men, especially men approaching 70 years old with a beautiful family and a phenomenally lucrative television job, would have accepted the rejection. They would have stayed on the safe, comfortable path of Yellowstone, collected their $1 million checks, and gracefully ridden into the sunset. But Kevin Costner is the man who put his own millions on the table to finish Dances with Wolves. He is the man who tied himself to the mast of a sinking ship in Waterworld. He looked at the executives, and he looked at the safety of his television empire, and he made a decision of absolute, breathtaking madness. He decided to push all of his chips into the center of the table one last time. He decided to finance the monumental creation of Horizon himself. But this time, the stakes were not just a few $1 million. This time, the stakes were astronomically, terrifyingly high. To secure the massive capital needed to build his dream, the aging cowboy was about to mortgage his own properties. He was about to initiate a bitter, highly public war with the creators of Yellowstone, demanding to reduce his shooting schedule, so he could direct his own film, a conflict that would eventually force him to walk away from the biggest show on television. He was preparing for the ultimate, final showdown of his entire cinematic life. But as he looked out toward the distant, alluring horizon of his ambition, he completely failed to notice that the foundation of his own home had fundamentally cracked. He was about to risk everything he owned to make a movie about the American frontier, completely unaware that his real-life sanctuary was about to be burned to the ground. The ultimate gambler was about to face a hand he could not possibly win. The ultimate risk and the shattered sanctuary. There's a fundamental, inescapable rule at the gambling table. The older you get, the more conservative you are supposed to become. When a man approaches his 70s, society expects him to cash in his chips. He is supposed to protect his assets, secure his estate for his children, and enjoy the quiet, comfortable sunset of a life well lived. But Kevin Costner's soul was forged in the unpredictable fires of the cinematic frontier. He has never possessed the biological ability to play it safe. Driven by an absolute, burning obsession to bring his 4-part Western epic Horizon, an American Saga, to the screen, Kevin made a financial decision that horrified his advisors. The Hollywood studios had refused to fully fund his massive, multi-million-dollar dream. So, at 68 years old, the man who had already secured a legacy as a global icon decided to personally bankroll the project. To secure the initial capital, an estimated $38 million of his own money, Kevin did the unthinkable. He mortgaged a spectacular 10-acre waterfront estate in Santa Barbara, California. This was not just a piece of real estate. This was the breathtaking coastal sanctuary he had spent decades building. It was the property he intended to leave to his children. It was the very foundation of his wealth. Speaking about this terrifying leap of faith with the reckless, unvarnished romanticism of a true artist, Kevin later admitted, "I've mortgaged 10 acres on the water in Santa Barbara where I was going to build my last house, but I did it without a thought. It has thrown my accountant into a fucking conniption fit. But it's my life, and I believe in the idea and the story. You have to put your money where your mouth is." He was leaving the absolute safety of his $1 million per episode salary on Yellowstone. He was walking away from the most successful television show in America, alienating powerful executives and heartbroken fans, all to chase a ghost across the desert. He was pushing every single chip he owned into the center of the table. He was preparing for the defining artistic battle of his twilight years. But Kevin was looking so intensely at the distant horizon that he completely failed to see the devastating explosion occurring right inside his own house. In May of 2023, while Kevin was deeply consumed by the grueling, exhausting production of his film, a completely unexpected, catastrophic news story broke. His wife of 18 years, Christine Baumgartner, the woman who had pulled him out of the wilderness, the mother of his 3 youngest children, had officially filed for divorce. The Hollywood establishment, his fans, and Kevin himself were absolutely blindsided. To fully comprehend the crushing, suffocating psychological weight of this moment, we must remember the agonizing fears we explored in the 4th chapter of his life. Remember that 20 years prior, Kevin had broken up with Christine because he was absolutely terrified of failing at a second marriage. He was paralyzed by the fear of putting another set of children through the trauma of a broken home. He eventually swallowed that fear, surrendered his ego, and gave her the family she desired, trusting that this harbor would be permanent. And now, At 68 years old, his absolute worst nightmare had come back from the dead to haunt him. The universe was proving that his deepest, darkest fears had been completely justified all along. But the tragedy of this divorce was not a quiet, dignified separation. It quickly devolved into one of the most bitter, humiliating, and excruciatingly public legal battles in recent Hollywood history. And it is here that the profound, almost sickening irony of his career reaches its absolute peak. Every Sunday night, millions of Americans tuned in to watch Kevin Costner play John Dutton on Yellowstone. Dutton was a patriarch of terrifying power. He controlled politicians. He commanded a private army of loyal cowboys. If anyone dared to step foot on his ranch or threaten his home, Dutton would violently, ruthlessly eliminate them. He was the absolute master of his domain. But in the harsh, humiliating reality of the California legal system, Kevin Costner had zero power. Despite having a strict, ironclad prenuptial agreement signed in 2004 that clearly stipulated Christine must vacate his properties within 30 days of filing for divorce, she simply refused to leave. She remained inside the $145 million Santa Barbara compound. The man who played the most powerful landowner on television was essentially locked out of his own bedroom by his estranged wife. To reclaim his own house, Kevin was forced to endure profound indignity of filing court documents, practically begging a judge to order the woman he loved to leave the premises. In a heartbreaking legal declaration that stripped away every ounce of his Hollywood invincibility, Kevin pleaded his case. I was married once before, and upon separation, I found myself without a home base and unable to live in my own home. I never wanted that to happen again. I am already contributing to child support, but I cannot be rendered homeless. Listen to the agonizing vulnerability in those words. I cannot be rendered homeless. This is not the voice of a billionaire superstar. This is the voice of an exhausted, heartbroken elderly man who is terrified of losing the roof over his head. The humiliation did not stop at the front door. The courtroom proceedings exposed the absolute, intimate details of his financial life to the entire world. Christine initially demanded a staggering $248,000 per month in child support, arguing that their children were accustomed to a luxurious lifestyle of private jets, luxury vacations, and immense wealth. For the millions of working-class men watching this drama unfold on the evening news, men who have spent their lives working to provide for their families, only to feel discarded and treated like walking ATMs when the marriage ends, this was an incredibly painful, enraging spectacle. It touched a raw, bleeding nerve in the cultural consciousness. Kevin was forced to sit in a sterile, fluorescent-lit courtroom, his face lined with exhaustion, listening to opposing lawyers dissect his bank accounts, his spending habits, and his future earning potential. He testified that the exorbitant demands were fundamentally unjust, and that he could not afford to pay such an astronomical amount, especially since he had just mortgaged his properties to fund Horizon. He had to fight to protect the very wealth he had worked for 50 years to accumulate, from the woman who had shared his bed for nearly 2 decades. In September of 2023, after months of grueling, agonizing public warfare, Kevin finally secured a legal victory. The judge drastically reduced the child support payments to $63,000 a month, and the couple shortly after agreed to a private settlement. Christine had finally moved out of the compound. The legal bleeding had stopped. Kevin had won the court case. He got to keep his house. He protected his finances. But when you're nearly 70 years old and you walk back into a massive, sprawling, 10-acre estate that is completely empty, it does not feel like a victory. It feels like walking through a graveyard. The chaotic, beautiful noise of his children and the presence of his wife had been entirely stripped away, replaced by the heavy, familiar, and terrifying silence he had spent 20 years trying to escape. He had survived the storm, but the wreckage was absolute. The safety net was gone. The emotional anchor was severed. There was nothing left to protect him. There was no comfortable home life to distract him. There was only the immense, terrifying gamble of the movie he had just bet his entire life on. As the calendar turned to 2024, Kevin Costner found himself entirely alone in the world once again. He had lost his wife. He had walked away from his television empire. He had put a massive mortgage on his home. The chips were all pushed to the center of the table. The ultimate, aging cowboy was mounting his horse for one final, desperate charge into the unknown horizon. And the entire world was holding its breath, waiting to see if the old gambler would pull off one last miracle, or the weight of his impossible dreams would finally, permanently crush him into the dust. The Last Cowboy, The Empty Mansion, and The Ultimate Horizon. There's a romanticized, almost universally accepted script for how a Hollywood legend is supposed to end his career. As the twilight approaches, the aging icon is expected to retreat to a comfortable, meticulously guarded estate. He is supposed to play golf, make occasional, highly paid cameo appearances, and quietly count his millions while reflecting on the glory of his past. But Kevin Costner has never read from the industry script. He is a man who builds his own stages, writes his own dialogue, and is entirely willing to burn his own house down just to ensure the lighting is perfect. In the summer of 2024, the staggering multi-million-dollar gamble that had cost him his marriage and alienated his television empire was finally revealed to the world. Horizon, an American Saga, Chapter 1 opened in theaters across the globe. The industry held its collective breath. Could the Golden Boy pull off one final, miraculous dances with Wolves' resurrection? The brutal, unvarnished answer from the box office was no. In an era dominated by 3-minute TikToks, computer-generated superheroes, and algorithm-driven content, modern audiences largely rejected the sprawling, 3-hour, methodically paced Western epic. The film struggled massively at the box office. The media, which had spent 30 years oscillating between worshiping and crucifying him, immediately pounced. They published scathing articles declaring that his massive gamble was a catastrophic blunder. They calculated the millions of dollars he had personally lost. They painted a picture of foolish, arrogant old man who had mortgaged his beautiful Santa Barbara estate for a total cinematic failure. To the outside world, it looked like the ultimate, humiliating defeat. He had lost his wife. He had lost his starring role on Yellowstone. And now, he was losing his fortune. But the media, with its incredibly narrow focus on quarterly profits and weekend box office returns, entirely misunderstood the soul of the man they were analyzing. How does a man in his late 60s react to losing tens of millions of dollars of his own money? He doesn't panic. He doesn't call his accountants in tears. He doesn't issue an apology. Kevin Costner simply packed his bags, walked back out into the blistering heat of the desert, and continued shooting Chapter 3. In a profoundly moving, staggeringly defiant interview regarding the financial risk he had taken, Kevin stripped away the illusion of material wealth and delivered philosophy that should echo in the hearts of every single person who has ever had a dream. I don't need 4 homes. I don't need it. I'll risk those homes to make my movies. I want to leave them to my children, but my children will have to live their own lives. If I haven't made mistakes, if I haven't taken risks, then what kind of life have I actually lived? I am not going to let this pile of things I have collected control me. I control them. I am not going to let this pile of things I have collected control me. Listen to the breathtaking magnitude of that statement. For the audiences watching at home, especially those who have spent decades accumulating wealth, terrified of losing what they have built in their twilight years, this is the ultimate liberation. Kevin Costner proved that true freedom is not having millions of dollars. True freedom is being entirely willing to lose it all if it means remaining faithful to your own soul. Today, in the year 2026, Kevin Costner is 71 years old. The physical realities of his 71 years are beautifully, undeniably written on his face. The thick hair is thinning and entirely silver. The deep, heavy lines around his eyes tell the story of a man who has squinted into sun on 100 different movie sets and cried in the dark of several empty houses. He lives largely alone in that magnificent, sprawling, 10-acre oceanfront estate in Santa Barbara, the very house he fought his ex-wife in court to keep, and the very house he mortgaged to fund his dream. The silence in the massive halls is absolute. The chaotic, vibrant noise of his younger children is now bound by custody schedules. It is a profound, heavy solitude. But when you look at him, standing on his balcony, staring out at the vast, crashing waves of the Pacific Ocean, you do not see a defeated man. You see the last of a dying breed. In a Hollywood that has become a sterile, corporate factory run by spreadsheets and focus groups, Kevin Costner is the final, magnificent dinosaur. He is the last true cowboy. He actually builds the towns you see on screen. He rides the horses. He tells stories about the messy, violent, and beautiful foundation of America, and he pays for it with his own blood, sweat, and bank accounts. He is the boy who was entirely cut out of the Big Chill. He is a visionary who bet everything on dances with wolves. He is the titan who nearly drowned in Waterworld. He is the broken-hearted father who navigated 2 devastating divorces. And he is the patriarch who carried Yellowstone on his shoulders. He has survived the most spectacular highs and the most agonizing lows that a human life can possibly contain. And as the sun begins to set on the American West, casting long, golden shadows across the plains he loves so much, the old gambler is still sitting at the table. His chips are pushed to center. His boots are dusty. His heart is scarred. But his eyes are still fixed on that distant, unbreakable horizon. He may be riding alone, but he is riding exactly where he was always meant to be. As the screen fades to black on the monumental, wildly unpredictable journey of Kevin Costner, the camera turns away from a Hollywood legend, and it focuses deeply on you. Kevin's story is a beautiful, terrifying reminder of the choices we all must face as we enter the autumn and winter of our lives. Society tells us that when we get older, we should lock our doors, protect our savings, and stop taking risks. We are told to choose the safety of the harbor over the turbulent beauty of the open ocean. But Kevin Costner sacrificed his safety, his marriage, and his fortune because he refused to let his dreams die inside of him. He proved that the fire inside your soul does not have to extinguish just because your hair turns gray. What about you? When you look back at the landscape of your own life, what were the biggest gambles you ever took? Did you ever risk everything for love, for a career, or for a dream? And as you look toward your own horizon today, is there a passion or a goal that you're still holding on to, refusing to let go? Please, do not let your wisdom go unspoken. Share your stories, your regrets, and your greatest, bravest gambles in the comments below. There are people reading these comments right now who are standing at a crossroads in their own lives, terrified to take the next step, and your story of courage might be exactly the push they need to finally follow their heart. If Kevin Costner's epic journey moved you, if it reminded you of the breathtaking beauty of staying true to yourself, no matter the cost, please leave a like on this video. Share it with someone who appreciates the old-school, unapologetic spirit of a true American cowboy. And subscribe to our channel, because we are committed to telling the deep, unfiltered, and profoundly human stories behind the legends we thought we knew. Thank you, deeply and truly, for spending your time with us today. Remember that it is never too late to chase your own horizon. Keep dreaming, keep riding, and until next time, stay brave.